Hello and welcome to the second edition of the AlignIT Manager Tech Talk series. I'm Ruth Morton from Microsoft Canada, and this is my co-host, Jonathan Rosenblit.
Hello, everyone.
Today we're going to be talking about Azure, but before we get into that, I'd like to do a couple of housekeeping things. So we actually do this series once a month. We do it on the second Thursday of each month at noon Eastern, and we do different topics. So anyways, without further ado, and you can find out more about the show on our portal, www.alignit.ca. So I'm actually going to turn this over to Jonathan now and to introduce our guest.
Okay, and before I do that, don't forget we also have our AlignIT LinkedIn group. You can get to that at microsoft.ca/AlignIT group. And also there is the AlignIT Twitter, which you can follow as well. And you can get to that if you look for AlignIT CA on Twitter. So with that, I'd like to introduce Joel to you guys. Joel is from Agility CMS here in Toronto. And of course, I can give you an intro for him, but you know what? You'd probably best to introduce yourself, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, the company, and sort of what you guys are doing in the cloud.
Sure, thanks. My name is Joel Vardy. I'm Director of Research and Development at a company called Agility CMS. Agility CMS is a web-based, hosted content management platform in the cloud. And it's unique in that it has a couple of different pieces to it. And one of them which is currently in Azure at the moment. So one of the pieces is the content management system itself, where your curated, edited content it sits and gets published out to all your digital channels. And those channels could be anywhere, any website, any sort of Facebook page, whatever you want it to be. The second part of that system is the user-generated content piece. And that's where things come in from your website, from your apps or whatever, and it gets saved into the cloud. And this is a specific API that we wrote. It's an open-based thing that it's used for contests, for registrations, for just any user-generated content on the web. Goes in there and sits in Azure right now. So it's hosted centrally, multi-tenanted application.
And that was actually, that was originally hosted on-premise, wasn't it?
It was.
Okay, so
we don't talk about that.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Well, since you brought it up then, what was it about what you don't want to talk about that actually then made you think of moving into the cloud?
Didn't you hear? He doesn't want to talk about it.
Which is exactly why I'm asking him.
Moving right along. No. So yeah, I mean, we invented the user-generated content system that we use right now. Built that from the scratch based on some ideas, based on some feedback, and on some other platforms that we'd use and wanted to bring in all the different things from that, okay? And it's very API-based, very developer-focused. We hosted it in-house, and that worked out great until we had sort of the sort of moments where you have that big contest hit or those big weekends when all of a sudden you have 10,000 people a minute trying to click like on something or whatever, and your servers are sitting there spinning at 100% and little melted pools of server on.
The infamous server.
Totally.
Yes.
And so it was like, and this was the point I think when Azure was still in beta. It really wasn't something we'd actually thought too much about. It was more like, how can we ramp up our own internal hosting environment to handle this kind of stuff? That's a scary problem. We need to fix this.
So once you made that decision, it made the business sense, technical sense to do it. What were your next steps after that? You said, okay, we should really rethink for this. We're thinking cloud makes sense. What then?
We started looking at, we went to Men, I think. This was around the time where it was, and Azure was being introduced. And I think this is around the time when Steve was like, we're on cloud or that stuff. And that actually meant a lot to us, to know that was a big investment moving forward for Microsoft and for a Microsoft development shop anyway. It sort of behooved us to look further into it. And they started off, one of the things that I remember using right away, this is before they had the training kits, it's like the precursor to that, these VMs you could sign into and do work on Azure and sort of figure out sort of how everything's going to go. And different guys that were on the Azure team, Steve Marks, Wade Wegner, had blog posts about what were coming up. And we started following all this stuff. And we saw it evolve from sort of, I think it was even pre-beta at one point we were looking into what was happening and we'd heard it, I can't remember if there was a code name, and it doesn't matter. By the time the beta came along, we were really involved in sort of what was going to happen and how it was going to be like developing applications for Azure.
Got it. So you mentioned the training kits. So that was fundamental, obviously, to getting your team of designers and architects and developers sort of ramped up, ready to go.
The biggest thing about training kits is that oftentimes what I'll do is to tell people, say, you know, how did you guys get into Azure, this sort of stuff. If you're getting into it now, you don't really just want to start reading blogs because you're going to get outdated stuff.
Of course.
You need to start off with an official source. And even even Microsoft employees have blogs that are 2 years old about Azure that don't make sense anymore because this product has evolved 180 degrees, not 180 degrees, but a long way from where it initially was based on developer feedback. So all the stuff that's sort of new is there because developers asked for it and it just made sense. It was always coming down the pipe. And so those training kits are actually really good right now. They're better than they ever were. To download those guys and you can play with it and you don't have to, there's no investment in that. You just your time, you know, spend a few hours, mess around with it and figure out if it's going to work for you.
So do we know where the training kits are for those that want to, can you just search for them?
Yeah, absolutely. If you search for the Windows Azure Platform Training Kit, or actually you can also go to microsoft.ca/WAPTK.
Awesome.
Very nice and short. But on that, so your developers they're doing their training and architects. What about your infrastructure guys? Are they thinking this is a little bit sketchy, making it a little bit uncomfortable?
I would have to say for us, our infrastructure guy was getting very nervous at this point about what we were going to do to be ramping up our hosting environment.
Because that's a huge part of a lot of IT folks' jobs is the whole infrastructure back-end data centers of their individual companies. So this is a huge discussion that I'm hearing every time I go and talk about this. This is what people ask me, well, what does that mean for my job? So yeah, I'd love to hear your experience.
I also get the developers asking me, what do I tell the IT guy?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's the other side of it for us is we're a fairly small development shop, you know, not that huge. We don't want to invest a lot in IT, right? Not that in IT budgets for hardware. So it didn't make sense for us to go that route. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the story for a lot of development shops. They may not even have a dedicated person for IT. And that's another story. So, or they're outsourcing it to someone. And those costs are, you know, it's something you really got to look at in terms of what's it going to be if you continue to do internal IT and you continue to invest in that in a big way as opposed to looking at cloud.
Or the other scenario, what I found is I've gone into some development shops and it's a developer that's doing the infrastructure, which works only up to a point, and then it usually, you know, all hell breaks loose. So.
It's one of those things, again, we don't talk about.
Yeah.
Developers developing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, then you can stick with what you're good at, right?
Absolutely.
And focus on your business.
Right.
Absolutely.
So yeah. So what was the reaction of the IT guy?
He in our case, he was big into cloud. He was the one that had been looking at that sort of those options with me and talking about it for a long time, even before Azure even came about. You know, we looked at Amazon, AWS when it was being invented and coming through, and some of those things. We even use Amazon S3 for a lot of our documents because that came about way before Azure, and we made an investment in that as a sort of thing. Well, how can we solve the problem of static files all over the place? And that's what we did for that. So the rough analogy now is blob storage, and I think blob storage in Azure is coming up to the point where it's roughly feature for feature with S3. So it's good that they're competing against each other a little bit. From a developer experience, the Amazon stuff wasn't where we needed it to be for us to work with it at that point. But that was also before we'd had our aha moment with our servers melting on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. Yes. So everything changes over time. By the time we were having those kind of moments, it's like we need to have a solution now. Azure was an option for us to start looking into.
Perfect. And what was that from that experience perspective, from taking your developers from what they already knew and moving them onto that platform? What was that experience? Was it a big ramp up?
It was tricky. You have to have the right kind of applications to run in the cloud, and especially in Azure. You have to know what it's going to be like when you get there. So that's why those training kit things are important. But really, you have to prototype your application and put it, and spend a long time, not necessarily calendar time, but you need to spend the amount of time necessary, relative to the size of your project, to put that in there, run it, see what it's going to be like. Get a beta group or a test group to run that and do real world stuff and figure out, do some iterations of it and see what it's going to be like. For us, UGC is what we put in there first. It's a multi-tenanted system already, okay? Well, it was architected to be that way. We had to split it up across our data centers so that one client wouldn't kill other clients kind of thing when it was
Yep.
dying. But so actually we had to re-architect that side of it a little bit so that, it would load balance itself based on, this client has a gazillion hits and this one has 2 and that kind of thing. So that all had to be built in and sort of evolve. So what we did is we rolled it out in beta form internally. And it's amazing how different the development experience is now from that, because that was actually a little bit painful for us. And I think that, because that was on the 1.1 SDK for Azure.
Then that would have been quite a while ago then.
That was the first, we were basically out there before it was gold.
You were pioneers in this, in using Azure in real world scenarios.
And then obviously with that you would have seen the good and the bad, and but we'll talk about that later and see.
Well, and how it evolved. I mean, I remember with the 1.1, that was a big improvement over what was there before. And I can remember when we had the ability to publish right from Visual Studio. The empowerment a developer feels from that is it's really cool to see that. To see the developer saying, hey, I can do it, I can push it to staging, and then have it all run there. We can test it all, and then we flip a switch, and it does the virtual IP switch thing. It never comes down. That is something that is really hard to set up on an internal environment. It takes a long time, and that's just built right in. So that's just one of the things that, out of the box Azure had, which was really good for us.
And you actually mentioned something that I think is really important to a lot of the people watching, and certainly I know from my discussions with a lot of developers. You mentioned that you kind of have to try stuff out. You got to play with it. You got to put it out there and see how it. So with that, like, what would be your guidance in terms of how do you look at what is a good candidate for the cloud?
Good question. It's hard. It's a hard question, but that is actually not as hard a question as it was. It used to be that really multi-tenanted systems were the thing. That if your system wasn't a multi-tenanted public access kind of thing, where you wanted, it's like an intranet application kind of thing, then it wasn't going to work. That's no longer true. In my mind, pretty much any web app could belong in Azure, especially with the idea of mobile workforces. Intranet apps that you have to VPN into, that to me, I don't understand why people still architect systems that way.
Right.
To me, that's like old school thinking, because you can do great security and still have your app in a public space, so people can have mobile offices. You don't have to VPN and all this sort of junk on top of all IT junk, I call it, on top of your application. You know what I'm saying?
And actually, I'll put a plug in for our Tech Days conferences coming up in Toronto, in Montreal, and Vancouver, because I'm actually taking a look at all the identity content. And a lot of what I'm looking at is trying to put together or bring some content that talks about on-premise and off-premise identity management and authentication, and for that very reason.
Well, if you're going to do a plug for Tech Days, then I feel the need to also do that, being the the content lead, if you will.
You have to one-up me, don't you?
I have to. But at Tech Days, actually, there's an entire session on just the stuff that Joel's talking about here, cloud computing, what does it mean for developers and all the various different permutations, and also what it means for the infrastructure guys, and sort of demystifying all the back-end stuff and seeing what's possible. So make sure that your teams are going out to Tech Days. Yeah. I'm done now.
Okay.
Back to you.
Back to our regular show.
Determining good candidates for the cloud.
Right. Back to, swinging back around you. So, to me, any web app, but also any sort of offline processing app, it works really well there too. So one of the things that we saw, and actually there's a lot of companies starting to do this now, is like video encoding things or audio encoding things. You can get a lot of processing power on demand in Azure. It's really hard to do. So those kind of things, those sort of offline processing things, work really well. And it forces you, because of the SLA, and normally you have a web role or a worker role. Okay, worker role are for those offline processing things. The SLA, to get that, 99.9 something uptime for your Azure apps, you have to have 2 instances in your role. Okay, so a role is think of that as like a deployment. It used to be 1 role per app. That's not true anymore. But think of it as an app for now, and then, or as a VM. Let's think of it as a VM image kind of a thing. And then in there's an instance of that VM running. And then what you're going to want to do is any one of those can be up or down at a time. So this instance comes offline, your service still has to be running. So you architect things differently. You architect it to be running in multiple instances. So that video encoding app that we were thinking of writing potentially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instances. When we got a lot of demand, we'll roll it down to 2 instances when we have less demand. Okay, right. The same thing for web roles. So we do that for our UGC app. You can do this on anticipation. There's tools actually that will do this automatically for you based on demand. So,
Very nice.
our CPU is, rocketing up to 80% now. We better spin something else up and whatever.
So that's actually probably important for the infrastructure guys too, right?
Yeah, well, and what excites me so much about what we're talking about in Azure is that the innovation that this enables, all of a sudden you have an idea that needs a lot of processing power or whatever. You don't have to build all this back-end infrastructure. It's amazing the potential for some really powerful innovation coming through Azure and cloud technologies is exciting.
See, and then from our perspective, the developer perspective, you always look at it, it's like, well, you know what? I don't have to wait 3 weeks to get a test environment, right? Or, and I don't have to worry about all of these different things that are now, I just deploy my app, right? But you actually, I wanted to pick on something that you mentioned before, security. Biggest worry for both development managers, infrastructure managers, anyone working with the cloud. What are your thoughts on cloud security? Or what do you think of when people say cloud security is a problem?
Well, thanks for giving me an easy question.
I didn't say if you came on the show, it would be easy.
First thing one of the things I like about it that's always been there in a web role, actually, and I think it's in a worker role too, is the ability everything's certificate based. Okay, so when you deploy a web role, you have the ability to put your certificate in there for SSL, and so your web app immediately SSL out of the box, so that you get the transport security there right away. Okay, another kind of thing, especially when you're thinking about, well, maybe it should have been an intranet app and people should VPN in to use it because they need to sign into Windows. Well, now you can actually do Windows domain authentication over your web app in Azure securely. Another thing you can do is if for whatever reason you don't want to host your database in SQL Azure.
We definitely get that one a lot, don't we?
Yes.
Drives me crazy. So first of all, don't not host your database in SQL Azure because you think it doesn't belong there. Look at what data might belong there that you could synchronize there. I've thought about a lot of applications that we've deployed over the years that could do really well in here. Some of them have data that doesn't really belong in Azure. It's private data. It never needs to be in the cloud. Well, you could synchronize that to the cloud, make it read-only or whatever, or have some sort of routine to do that. The other thing you can do is, I think it's had a couple different names. I think it's called Azure Connect.
Sure is.
It allows you to make a secure, and this is really cool technology, it makes a secure IPv6 pipe between any machine and wherever you want it to be, and your app, your deployment in Azure. Right. So we've tried this out. It works ridiculously well. It's actually really fast. Like the latency between here and the north central location for Azure, it's actually really good. The latency was really low. And we tested that for a SQL database.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, then what you're saying is that though most originally have that worry about security, is that rather than just saying, okay, security is a showstopper, that's it, that there are various different ways of looking at it, and it may not actually be as much of a problem as it's perceived to be.
Yeah, here's where it comes down to. To me, with cloud and security is just one of these things. It makes you take a step back from what you thought you knew as a developer or as an architect or as an IT person. You take a step back and it allows you to do something that you haven't had a chance to do before. It's not like a new operating system or a new development platform. It's a new methodology, it's a new paradigm, a new way of thinking. It's the kind of things that you learned about in sort of computer science class. Was like a whole new computer science paradigm came along when we, with C++ or whatever.
C#, of course.
No. Yeah, well,
kidding.
When it was moving from C to C++, that was a big deal. That was a paradigm shift.
Yeah. Right.
This is a paradigm shift, and I think because our computing world has matured a little bit, we don't necessarily recognize those as easy as we might have back in the computer science days. I don't know, whatever.
Got it.
Maybe university students know that now. I don't know. It's 12 years ago for me. But it's a paradigm shift, and it makes you step back and say, what if I thought of this a different way? What if I thought of it as I don't have to have everything inside my office for it to be secure? Just leave that notion behind and say, well, if I wanted it to be secure in the cloud, what did I have to do? Do I need it? Is SSL okay? Is domain authentication over an IPv6, IPsec channel, is that okay? Maybe that will be okay. Are there examples of other people doing this? So start thinking outside of your own box and start looking at sort of the bigger picture of what computing even means, because a web app isn't a web app. It's it's, you know, you may access it in your browser, but you may have it on your phone, you may have it on the tablet device, whatever that is in a few years. You know, internet things are connecting to other stuff all the time. I mean, the big question used to be, what's a web service? What does XML mean? These questions are like, we laugh at these things because it's like we take it for granted. Everything's connected to everywhere. Service-oriented architecture, it makes so much more sense now because it's all, these pieces are actual real pieces of your systems. Like for us, let's look at Agility CMS for 1 second. I'm not plugging my product. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, you are.
It's what I know. Okay, it's what I know. So right now, as I said, the UGC system is in Azure. We're moving everything into Azure, but keeping it in its disparate pieces so that if we want to geolocate one part of our application as a different service, it totally makes sense to do that, right? Or for instance, you know, whatever, something happens, there's a, you know, a big flood in the north central location and that totally goes down, we can just ramp up another location quickly. We could never do that with our own data center easily. We would have to have a whole other data center, right? We can't just, you know, flick a switch and have it flip over, right? I mean, with Traffic Manager, that'll be automatic, which is really cool. I
love your passion, I must say.
Yeah. Should I slow down? I'm probably talking so fast.
This is one of the, we had actually, Joel, for the AlignIT tour that happened in March, and you were one of the panelists, and that's why actually we invited you back, because you have such passion about Azure and about cloud computing. It's awesome to see. And I hope you don't mind, but I do want to get out the story that I know already of what your experience has been like on Azure, and what are some of the ups and downs that you've experienced, because that's what other people are also asked. Well, you know, what's the uptime like, and what happens if something does go wrong? Because we've heard the stuff in the news. Most cloud providers have had hiccups, and they're really well publicized.
Yeah.
What's that experience like?
Well, our experience is the ski story. This is what we tell around the water cooler at work, and it just happened to be bad timing as well as a bunch of other things. We had a company ski day. Okay, it was like, let's all go skiing in February and it'll be fun.
Love small companies.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was a great day, great weather. 9 o'clock in the morning, driving to the ski hill, you know, checking email.
Oh no.
My wife's like, what are you doing checking email? We're over the day off. Good thing I checked email, because clients started phoning in or, you know, emailing in saying, I think this might be down or whatever, and we're accessing it, you know.
And this is why you never take any days away from the office.
Why didn't I bring my notebook? Anyway, so luckily someone did bring the notebook, and we at least had a computer to go and check to see what was happening. And yeah, there was a bug in the SDK 1 point something, 1.2 I think it was, where, you know, just something happened on the VM and it went down. So it wasn't all of Azure went down, our VMs went down, and there was down pretty much all day. And this was, it was really nasty. Like getting through that ski day, we had a lot of fun skiing with the kids, but that was nasty. And we were like, what is going on here? How could this possibly happen? This is supposed to be never happening. Turns out we actually did a few things that we could have done differently to fix the problem as well. But Microsoft, I couldn't believe the response actually that we got from Microsoft, from different people responding to our issue. We had people in the office the next day. How can we fix this and make sure it doesn't happen again?
Yeah,
so that was cool. To the office?
I didn't, but somebody did, and kudos to them.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was the message that we got. It's like, these are the kind of problems that we need to fix forever. And you know, how are you? And let's look at your application architecture. What are the other spots that you're doing that we might not have anticipated? So that was the kind of conversation that was really enlightening to have. And I think that this is what Azure. This is how it's different from a lot of other. And that's how Microsoft is different from how it was. They're really listening to developers for this. And as a developer that's been there since .NET 1.0, to see how slow it took for things to come through from 2000 to like 2005, to see how quickly things are iterating now. In one way, it's scary because it changes like almost daily. You know, those training kits. There's new versions of that stuff all the time. There's, I think we're on SDK 1.4.1, which is like to me it could have been 1.5 because it had a lot of new things in there. And by the way, the versions for Azure, it's interesting to see they kind of map up the SDKs with the sort of the version of the VM. It's not really an operating system change. It's like how there's kind of a layer around the operating system, the VM, that really controls how your app runs in Azure, and that's versioned as well. So when you deploy on the new version, you kind of get that new operating system layer as well.
So let me ask you this though: with all of these changes every once in a while. How do you know when you're ready from training, doing in the lab, when you're ready to go production with the cloud?
It's a gutsy move. Well, it's easy to test. You just give it to some clients.
Fair enough.
And I'll say, from having done a lot of pilots and deployments and stuff before coming to Microsoft, you select the clients, or you select who's going to pilot it for you. You know, they're your friendlies, your people that are going to kind of work with you and do some of the bumpiness at the beginning.
Well, let's be honest. Anyone who's ever deployed software the first time live, you babysit. You sit there and you make sure that your clients know that, look, this is new. We have these other failovers we can do. We can put your app here or there or whatever. You just do whatever it takes to push this forward because you know it's important. Mm-hmm. You do have to. It's a leap of faith to run any new piece of software. I can talk from experience. When we put UGC on there for the first time, I breathed a sigh of relief because now I don't have to go and install software and launch new VMs in our own data center. I can turn a number from 2 to 5 if we have a problem. And I know that the SQL databases are backed up. They're already mirrored on 3 different servers and all that sort of stuff. It's like I don't have to worry about all these things I used to worry about.
All you have to worry about is your code, your software, your product.
More importantly, your business.
Your business, right?
Yeah, and actually the other thing I worry about is all the little, maybe I shouldn't say this, but there's a bunch of little things that we're waiting on still with Azure. And with SQL Azure, there's a few things that I think are missing that could be there, that will be there potentially, I hope. For instance, reporting services wasn't part of the initial offering. It is now to a certain extent. So I'm kind of assuming that I know this is going to keep on iterating. We're going to see more and more features brought forward. I mean, SQL Azure, to my mind, it's there now because people didn't like table storage. Right. Or that was like, well, that's what it is, but it's not SQL. We want to be able to bring our databases in the cloud. And there are a few other providers that have tried to do this, and I think Microsoft went the route with SQL Azure specifically to reinvent what databases mean in the cloud, and that they kind of had to dumb it down a little bit to say, okay, well, these subset of features are going to work, but that has grown over time, and I think they'll come to very close to parity, soon.
So with
that, we kind of have to wrap it up. So yeah, we're at the end of our time. It went really quick.
That was quick. Can I squeeze one more in?
Okay,
just one.
One more.
Just one.
Okay.
If you were to give one piece of advice for someone that is considering their move to the cloud, what would it be?
Test it. Try it. Step back and try it.
Yeah.
There you go. See, that was simple.
That was good. That was good. Thank you very much. So thank you for joining us online. You're not a chatty bunch, but that's okay. We had lots to talk about. So we appreciate you joining us. We also hope that you'll join us for next month's talk. It's going to be post-build conference. I don't know who has heard about the big build conference, all about Windows 8. We're going to be talking about the Windows 8 roadmap, or your Windows roadmap in general. We're going to have one of our colleagues on the show with us, David Remmer. And to be honest, there's so much secrecy around build and Windows 8. We don't really know what we're talking about yet, but we do.
We're going to take that show to a whole new level of live.
Yeah, so we'll find out. We will talk about what gets announced at Build, and
what you need to know about it.
Yeah, what you need to do about it. Excellent. I'm looking forward to that show. That'll be good. Thanks a lot, Joel.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us. And we'll see you next time.
Until next time. See ya.